나가서 내민지 개위 미기벨에다 개위레기 내민이 되고 난 답이 되고 규정이 되고 대때네들에 해서는 또 쓰네 가사티 쉬어라.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me at the back there? Am I a bit louder at the back? Let's see, I think. Is it a bit loud? Can you hear me right at the back there? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. So last night we looked at the three ripening effects of karma, looking at the fully ripened effect, as well as that of the environmental effect or the dominance effect, and the second being that of the effect concordance with the cause. So we looked at those three last night. So there was a question last night that we didn't get to. So maybe if you want to start with that, Cameron.
We were talking about the completion versus the performance. Yes. And my question was just simply, is the measure of completion no interest in the thing? So, for example, in the example of chocolate, and is effectively the renunciation, the completion of the renunciation, the desire for chocolate, no interest?
So in terms, last night we also looked at virtuous actions, and there we spoke about the four branches of the action, the basis, the attitude, or including the motivation, and the performance and the completion. So particularly in relation to the completion, where the completion of the virtuous action is that where one has lost interest. For example, in terms of the diabetic with chocolate.
Yeah, or any type of non-virtuous action.
용익이 딱 돈 뒷발대 사이기 돈함 lapsam 되나 이진이 나서 이렇게 chocolate 물들에 세기 말에 이 돈함 제서 되게 제서 얘네들이 딱 따뜻해나
말이 다도 말을 해마다 나보 진이나서 chocolate 진다 누구 요래서다 하고 하지 그 사기면 삼제 That's like something that Tamachevati and Jelia Kayamas and Sasha Jorva. Cisadi Tardu to your Mares. Cisadina sing on the Dambo and the chicken Tiu Sochi Tiba Chigimes and Pigeta. That Bangudu Sempe Samlata. That the nigger Sochi the Bangi and Beta, Samlata George, Samla dinner, Tamachevina. Ne go Tardu to your Mares. That in the Bangis that Jing Mess, a sim touch by another, and Tartu to Gores, Diroa.
Because then Tatu had Tuki in a middle, so you can kind of circle with it.
A so similar touch of and touching mess and sim touch or what I did.
Because then he don't hear Siki there, Yanning attention to him. I do the year, you need shaking it. Then he Tatu
Kare.
Benefit each other. Yamanati Bruising Alak Ayopshe and say, Derby, you need not shaking it.
Say again. Derby said, Sugimi and because
at the Derby, and he couldn't say it. Derby, the shake it, Yine, and the Tatu Tutsa, Jason, in the Derby cake, you need shaking it.
That Subi Le Gavachepalitella, Subi Javache Udua. That did as we point summertime of Lunga Java, Sugi Javache, I mean, was to draw say some Migiville sometime in it, Tabo that Sudi Kunoje. Didn't Joa said, laughing to say Joa, what Joa in the Copa Sune, she's one of that Tartu Jua. Celia. Chesanta Kivil, that they need Tilago Chesa, so big Migiville Sabala, Simji Sobal, Lunga, Lugi, Javache Udwaje. Then Simja social bumpy Kivilla Sabala, Lugi Javache, Kamiduasi, Samlatan Madamiduache. samda de nangbo da simje soju chine ya gu yo mare sembe ge gyun thong ji da simje soju che de bang gu du sembe de ba ge di gun lo cha ro da de ba ge da jo wa gar cha go se ne dang ye simje soju chi me sembe sam lo chi dang di nangbo de jo wa che je ma da da wa yin jing me se ta je ji li ru wa da din yi le ko bar sam ru yo yo ma se da ko nangbo de jo wa che ni ba ta je de ta du cha ro kore da nangbo jo wa ge ta de le da 아직 좀 유아 친제 심지어 소주변에 다도 주요 말해서 되세요.
Because the link you have to get it, you need to hear it and show you come in. It's on your belly self or not. Because it's sometimes also deeper change to the key.
근데 기어는 디퍼시기도 하네. 디퍼 제기 되게 기어를 하기도.
Then deeper change to the key. You need to know how to get some young drink it. Oh, deeper 아니 제기 매. 그래서 뭐가 이 GSM 기차. 나도 기차. 제가 오늘 두산대 세트비어 이내기 뜻다래 나도 제기 매. 얘네 이 다른 그렇게 얘기를 세트 그렇게 기기를 얘네 제기 매 가능한스나 디퍼사이트 그렇게.
디디 지메선 다 주는데 디고 다도 줍서로 지메선 다 쳐바로 거기 가서는 디제 유아 저거 말마도 다 줘 디로와 데델에 양치 당보들 디보에 삼다디 지 다디 방고도 sembe 공원 제고도 지메선 맞음 이름다 진짜 공원 지에 내가 지메선 메셈 다 쳐봐 있네 거 다도 줍어야 돼.
So it's not necessary to have gone as far as to have abandoned any wish for it at all, but rather the completion is with that firm determination. You may still have the wish for the illustration of the chocolate, but I'm not going to be doing that. Yeah. So the completion is having reflected on the faults, made that firm decision. I will not engage in this harmful activity. Then even if the wish arises, it doesn't have sufficient strength to overpower that virtuous mind. So the wish to engage in something may arise, but there's no follow-up on that. Rather, or the only follow-up would be the virtuous mind being recalled, or the mindfulness of that virtuous mind would recall it, and then one does not follow. So the completion is this definite decision. This is something I'm not going to do. And it's definite not just in the moment, but it's lasting.
Right. So my only concern is that there may be the potential to lapse back into the old ways. So the idea of completion seemed to me like where you no longer had any possibility of lapsing back into the old ways.
Darum tatuk guessing tatuk for the video. That's it. Then not the Karina, checking me. Tikvasakian Shepherd la Sofa. Indian checking me. In a person, tatuk. Yini Sangi Nani Dunachema, Yopekia, checking.
디디 사바로 야가 사바로 다데딩 안주 대전 지식으로 다 당보 소주네 야고요 말했으면 삼로당 규인지 통 다 소주 방구도 선배 삼로당 되네 방능이 방기 선배 삼단된 다 줘버렸네 니 내가 지켜와 상인수 내가 사바로 디디 벤디 까면 상인 말에 까면 가시 질러 양게 사바 기를 깨와지로 예 가산디 개와서 개와게 바로 거 타도 주바래 디레야디 삼로 유와다 베네디 근데 그거 디바 유와다 디 걸 카가 차그로.
So we'll just stay with the chocolate. So you reflect as a diabetic, you reflect on the faults of eating chocolate, and you make the firm decision, I'm not going to eat chocolate anymore. So you've come to the completion or the conclusion of that virtuous mind. The virtuous imprint has been accumulated. Tomorrow, next week, the imprint's a bit weak, and one eats chocolate. Now one has accrued, it's not really non-virtue, but for the sake of our illustration, we'll say it is. And then, so now, last week, you accumulated a virtuous mind, this week, a non-virtuous mind. So the completion is not dependent on one for a specified period, not doing it again. It's that firm decision, then and there, based on reasoning, I won't do it. Then if one happens to do it later, then one still has that virtuous imprint, that virtuous karmic imprint from before, but now one has accumulated a new non-virtuous karmic imprint. So like killing the mosquito would be clearer, which is non-virtuous.
That gave le de la lunga yusumi gave le ju or wada mi gave ju de la ya, that chilling chung sum se. Chemboda, Chungwoda, Jingda, the gave that Mazu gave le de Chidana, Gawashi gave le de Lada, Chungwoda, Jingda, Chembo Sumura Dinaj, the disorder, the led. Jisadi naming the Kayungurua, Jazada de Lea, naming this and naming Kariungurasne, gave le Chungwoda, Jingdang, Chembuge, Midang, Deladang, Kamgoma, Niger, Harikios, the gave le naming it, that gave Penjigiles. That is Gavadilla, Gawa that Kivile, Penjigilis, Tesumurada, Kivile, Tigi, Carret, Delia Chungona, Shimbo, Jingusum Gores, Chungo Digel Kawakis, Milan, Debel Halaki Gores, that's a Chungo Digel, Halaki, Miliki Gores, Jing Digi, Debig Halaki Gores, the Chambo Digi, and the Kamgom Sudan Sumelia Gores.
Where we are in the text is we've looked at non-virtuous karma. Now we're looking at virtuous karma. And last night we looked at the effects or the results of non-virtuous karma. Now we're looking at the effects or results of virtuous actions or virtuous karma. And the Lama Tsongkhapa starts in the same way as he did last night by talking about the fully ripening result that follows from virtuous karma. And what that ripening result will be is dependent on the strength of the virtuous karmic imprint. So reading from the text at the bottom of page 136, the effects of virtuous actions. From among the three effects of the virtuous paths of action, the fully ripened effect is to be born as a human being, a desire realm god, or a god of the two upper realms through the force of small, intermediate, or great virtuous actions. So independent on the strength of the virtuous action, whether it's small, intermediate, or great, one will be born in one of these various states.
And is not that dynamic what is that in and GD and Guding it about David said that Jibacha name it about Guding it about David Sumura, Zidanda Kewa children Chusum Gida, and that children Chusum said that Dinalia, Chikunlung Tone, and Chagro Kunoda, the Negatone, Jova Joatan Kunoda, the Negatone, that Shushishun Tone, children Chusum Charugre. That the name Delia that did Kewa Chimbo said, then come Gomala Kigri said that the Garsore and Zuge Shine Tubje, Shine Topnamado, and Kamgoma Lady Sayoma, just and Chimbo said, Kamgoma Lady La, that the Shine Tubje, Shine Topore.
So reading just the end of that sentence. Through the force of small, intermediate, or great virtuous action. So what determines the strength of the virtuous action is the strength of the motivation. So this is the same as we saw last night in terms of the non-virtuous action. It's the quality of the motivation that determines the strength, or it's the strength of the motivation that determines the strength of the karmic result. And in terms of the great virtuous action, that is what leads to rebirth in the form or formless realm. And that necessarily also, or what creates a karmic imprint, a virtuous karmic imprint of such strength, is that it is done together with a mind of calm abiding. In that, calm abiding is the mind that creates the great karmic imprint, a great strength of karmic imprint that leads to rebirth in the form or formless realm.
Jaro, see the Gaza Migi or Sheba, Migi, Guding, David, Sheba, the Docho did that, 아니 그 계획에게 내 답이보다 규정이 되고 되게 해서 somewhere the door
So what we've looked at thus far of the three ripening effects of virtuous actions is the first, the fully ripened effect. And now for the next two, it's presented at the top of page 137. In the case of the effect concordant with the cause and the dominant or environmental effect, these are the opposite of the respective effects from non-virtuous actions. So that was presented in more detail in the section we covered last night in the non-virtuous actions. But here it's presented, it's just the opposite of those.
맨날 가상한 소주백이 답이고 가서 규정이 되고 가르는 거라서는 새 통화 용어를 해서 밀 샘지 밀게 봐이네야. 근데 나와래게 냐와래 타지 밀게 봐이네 미들이야 채통노 용어를 해서 소주백이고 답이고디 가서 규정이 되고 새 통화 용어를 나로 다디 도저되라 다 소주 빵비기 개베레 사이비기 규정이 되고 될 가르스네 밀게 봐이네 체령화 용어를 해서 주로 체령화 용어를 해서
So to give an illustration, last night then it was mentioned that if one kills, it's a non-virtuous action, can lead to rebirth in the lower realms. And that same imprint, so that would be the fully ripened effect, which would lead to rebirth in the lower realms. But when it leads to rebirth in the say it again. So if one kills, when that negative karmic imprint, when it ripens as a propelling karmic imprint, it will lead to rebirth in the lower realms. When one is later born as a human being, so from a different karmic imprint, that previous karmic imprint of killing can still ripen in terms of the effect concordant with the cause, and how that karmic imprint from killing ripens as an effect concordant with the cause is to have a shorter life. So this was mentioned specifically last night. So then, if one accrues the virtuous karmic imprint of abandoning killing, when that ripens, that virtuous karmic imprint of abandoning killing ripens as a effect concordant with the cause, it would be the experience of having a long life. So the opposite. The effect concordant to the cause of killing is when born as a human to have a short life. The effect concordant to the cause of the virtuous imprint of abandoning killing is when born as a human to have a long life.
마침벌렘바 빵비기 게웨레기 내미니 되보데 되네 미르게다 되네게 땅 미르게라다 미르게야 되네 안데 다가서 규정이 되보데라 안데 가르용을서네 롱주에 채워 용구리 해서 롱다 규정이 되보데 롱주에 채워 용구리 해서.
Similarly, last night we saw that from the non-virtue of stealing, if it ripens as a propelling karma, it leads to rebirth in the lower realms. But later, when born as a human being, should it ripen as a effect concordant with the cause, one will be impoverished and will struggle to have material resources. So that's from the non-virtuous imprint. Then the effect concordant with the cause of the opposite imprint, so that the virtuous imprint, the virtuous karmic imprint from abandoning stealing, this will be to have an abundance of material resources.
나디네기 로임 수위기 답방백의 계획이 안에 규정이 되버들 가서는 네 초말아서 송화도 용거리 했어요. 안데디 개화식으로 하다 도저히 마시나 되기도 하다 로임 수위기 나 방백의 계획이 규정이 되고 관리를 해서는 초말아서 송화도 용거리 했어요.
When the effect concordant to the cause from the virtuous mind of abandoning sexual misconduct is the opposite of what we saw last night. So this is that one will have a harmonious and lasting relationship with one's partner. One's partner will not leave you.
어디나신다 당한주기 주인셰바 방비기 기위리기 안에 규정이 되버들라 꾸르와도 미생기 소소리아 아니 즉 구십시가 야고를 결혼하셔야 된바래서 꾸르와도 용거리에서 시작으로다.
And through cultivating the virtuous karmic imprint of abandoning lying, then the effect concordant of the cause of the virtuous karmic imprint is one will not be slandered.
근데 한두시는 차상 마시나다 디 독서디 바데 세부터 하고 도야라 안디 배선로 되네시제 안디네 자다 다야 당은 지금 양 개비 가서 레딜에 가려 열었으네 캐버 nen지 펜벨에다 안에 조직이 세대 야 예와를 개발 마선도시는 개치고래.
And so forth. So you can read all those from the previous page 135, and there one will see the effects concordant to the cause from non-virtue, and the opposite of those, as illustrated, will be the effects concordant to the cause of the opposing virtuous actions. So then the text comes to other categories of karma. So if you looked at non-virtuous karma, virtuous karma, now the third, other categories of karma.
나들이와 편속의 예완이 사다 대조 편비게 레니 개와다 난조 편비게 레니 미개와인라서 편비게 레다 다 레셔야지 비네 된조려야 편비 레셔야지 가르스네 개와를 개위레스 다 난조려 편비 레디 미개위레스.
We see other categories of actions or karma has these two parts. I'll just skip that because it's not in the Tibetan. Then looking at the difference between propelling and completing actions. So this word propelling, you may know as projecting, or as it used to be translated as throwing karma. But here we use propelling. So propelling actions for a fortunate rebirth are virtuous actions. So in other words, from virtuous karma, because the word action is the English for karma, from virtuous actions, one attains rebirth in a fortunate realm. Whereas propelling actions for rebirth in the lower realms are non-virtuous actions.
지로유래 당이디 편지가 있어요다. 다들 편지를 기회리기 편지디기 레디기 망안돌 마 방바균이요 말했어. 가 방에서는 개와 대월 된돌 마도. 다 미기회리기 편지 미기회리기 아니 안돌을 편바다 아니 양가별에 된돌에 편바 여러분은 되어 말했어. 제사다 기회리기 편지 기회리나 디기 패디 깨월해야지 된돌을 깨월림비 캐부리스 편지 미기회리나 디기 마오버 깨월해야지 안다 안돌을 깨월림비 캐부리스 월 타취그리스.
What's presented in this first line about propelling actions, about propelling karma, is definite. It's all so the propelling karma is what propels a rebirth, and so therefore a virtuous karmic imprint, when it ripens and propels a rebirth, it is definite that rebirth will be in the fortunate realms. And the opposite is also the case. Should a non-virtuous karmic imprint ripen at the time of death, that non-virtuous propelling karmic imprint, it is definite it will lead to rebirth in the lower realms. So there's no ambiguity, there's no exceptions. Virtuous karmic imprints, when they propel a rebirth, the rebirth will necessarily be in the higher realms. And if it's a non-virtuous imprint that propels a rebirth, that will necessarily be in the lower realms. This is definite. There are no exceptions to this.
다 내게 다 조직이 세들에 내봐요 말해지 조직이 제부들라 미야디 가브릴레 아니 된들레 민바용고레 가브릴레 간돌레 된레 민바용고레 된들라 개위 조직이 개위리기 제부디 인지미지 된들레 내봐 민비 내봐요 말해지 된들레 민바용고레 간들레 민바용고레 예지레 조직 미기위리기 제부들라 양 아니 인지미지 간들레 민비 내봐요 말해지 간들레 민바용고레
So that's about propelling karma. Then the next sentence, which is now about completing karma. Lama Tsongkhapa writes, the completing ones are undetermined. So propelling actions, you could say, are determined, and probably better will be definite, because this is the word for definite, just here translated as undetermined or not definite. What the meaning is that for propelling imprints, propelling karma, it is definite that virtue ripens in a rebirth in the higher realms. And non-virtue, if it ripens as propelling karma, it's definite, it ripens in rebirth in the lower realms. But this is not the case for completing karma. Completing karma, when it ripens, virtuous karma can ripen in either the fortunate realms or the lower realms. Likewise, when non-virtuous completing karma ripens, it can ripen in either high realms or low realms, as experiences within those realms, not propelling one to that rebirth, because that's propelling karma, but as experiences within those rebirths, within those lives. So what propelling karma is the imprint that propels one from the life where you're dying into your new life. So it propels one to the fortunate or lower realms. Hence, the word propelling or projecting or throwing throws one into the fortunate or higher realms. Whereas completing karma does not fulfill this function of propelling the rebirth to the particular life or realm, but rather completes conditions of within or the conditions or the situation one finds oneself in. And the text will then make this clear. For example, whether one's limbs are incomplete and so forth. For example, the practice of generosity, when one is developing a generous attitude, this is virtuous. And when it ripens as completing karma. And so too, for the opposite of generosity, the mind of miserliness, this too, as a non-virtuous karmic imprint, when it ripens as completing karma, not as propelling karma.
다 밀리 깨발련 저다 미 텔야 세고다 안에 튕긴 야구 용어디 냐마 진보다위 레기 제부 차고 저다다 조직을래 폐 계획레기 마미 편지기레디기 밀리 바 깨발련 되네 미 깨발련 선에 되네 아 직사야 동야다 되네 토네 제부 미야디다 조직이 제부 민거래 제로.
A virtuous karmic imprint, when it ripens and propels a rebirth, that rebirth will necessarily be in the fortunate realms, in the high realms. And that imprint, that virtuous karmic imprint that ripens and propels a rebirth in the high realms is a propelling karmic imprint. And what and let's say one's born as a human being, and one has excellent conditions, resources. This is an effect, a result of generosity, the virtuous karma of generosity. And when that ripens, it ripens not as propelling karma, but completing karma.
Dine that milky, that milky when the Jawangama, the Chimbigi, that Jikile, Same, then Sena Manguchi, Sena Gile Mangu, and then milky when and Benjo Yungura. This is all that Gary Legi, Penji Gary Legi, milky water, Yahweh Pem Gary Pembarede, in that Zoshi lady Migawa Chatter. Just I dig it that Tingen Gombo Chad, Zayatoya Gombo Chad, the
And for someone else born as a human, that they were born as a human indicates that at the time of the death in the previous life, a virtuous karmic imprint ripened and propelled a rebirth into the fortunate realms, in particular that of the human realm. But if they are impoverished, if they struggle to gather material goods, then we can recognize that a completing karma from miserliness has ripened. So this would be non-virtuous karma that has ripened in their fortunate rebirth as a human, and therefore they are suffering from poverty.
Penje Migi Legi Pa Gevan Dundra Gerwa. That kid Gavana, that kid Coronia, Taku Yaboda, Dele Kalajan Yapojina, Koran said to the Yaboradi, that Yama Koron in Tibetan will give you Saba, in Digi Zoshi, Jebudi, Dien Dilla, Nandre, in a Dien Dilla, Zoshi gave you Timbeta, gave you Legi, Jebudi Minje, Koronia, and said to the Dinatone, Ganga, Mateva, the Ungorvadi, and Jeza, Dien Di, and the Peg lady, Migi Legi Penje, a Dien Di. Dudui Din Chadre. That Din Delia, Jumia di Yama Givi Legi, that Zochi Givi Legi, Jihumingo, which is not a Zochi Givi Jiboti, Migi Delam, Nansung 100 de la Mimbayore, and Dendra de la Mimbayore said this word. Period.
To give another example, being born as an animal, let's say a dog, that this being is a dog in the animal realm, shows that its propelling karmic imprint was non-virtuous because it's been born in the lower realms. So therefore, we know that this being is living the result of non-virtuous karma. But they could have plenty of virtuous karma ripening in their life. For example, virtuous karma from, in a previous life, practicing generosity. When this ripens for the dog, whilst they are in the lower realms, a rebirth propelled by non-virtuous karma, non-virtuous propelling karma propelled this rebirth as a dog, but virtuous completing karma from generosity can ripen. Then this dog will live in a comfortable home with plenty of food to eat and so forth. So in this way, we see that the rebirth from the propelling karma is definite. Non-virtuous will lead to the lower realms. But even in the lower realms, virtuous completing karma can ripen because the completing karma is not definite.
Ulo Soni Migiwe Chela Asum. Then Dundro Dang Ida Laya and then Perju Punsun Soba Yubani Giwe Cheba was that the never maybe Kimjan Piero Sungar.
Then Lama Tsongkhapa gives illustrations showing how that whilst propelling karma is definite, completing karma is not definite. However, even in the fortunate rebirths, incomplete limbs, minor body parts or sense faculties, hideous looks, a short lifespan, multiple illnesses, poverty and so forth are caused by non-virtue. So we see here is a virtuous rebirth a rebirth from a virtuous imprint, but non-virtuous completing karma ripening. And then the opposite. Also, in the case of animals and hungry ghosts, abundant prosperity is caused by virtue.
And Jazada Dendrola Kebaina Zoji Migi Legitivu Mimba Yunguri Satiswa Dendroya, Yalada, Nila, Lapa, Labata, Gamba, Dine, Masawa, Omba Masawa, Mimana, Do Midupa, and Setonada, Neamambu, and Joa, Benjo, Joa, Dene Chadige, Chaza, and Zoji Migi Legitivu, yes. Immediately, Dendi, that means that go Dendro Telekid, gave a penji, gave a legi penny or there. In that Zoji Legi Debudida, the Legi Debudi, Dende meet in the Mingor was to Smingor Edges.
So when, at the time of death, a virtuous karmic imprint ripens as propelling karma, one will definitely be reborn in the higher realms, so let's say as a human. But whilst one is being propelled by a virtuous imprint, it is entirely possible for non-virtuous karmic imprints to ripen as completing karma. Then one will have, as it says here, incomplete limbs, minor body parts or sense faculties, so like one's fingers, or sense faculties, one's sight, hideous looks, a short lifespan, multiple illnesses, poverty, and so forth. So this shows how completing karma is undetermined, whereas propelling karma is definite.
On the that Dendro in the Zoji Legi Migi Village to Minogores. Then Dendi that Migi Village pen picking under the pendio by Inaya, Zoji Legi Watu to your resident, give him to Mindio, your resident. Duro Sulios and Ben Dundro da Ida de and the Gudi Penji lady Migi Village Pembare. In our consolia, Benjo Punson so Yobar, Ben Ida and Duro Cashelia. That Duro said the Jinga Benikida would the Basin Shasaro, or Dinashi, the Ida double, Ida in a Delia Benjo Yakushu, Korong, Guchu, Jura, Jungur Echere.
And then that next sentence, also in the case of animals and hungry ghosts, abundant prosperity is caused by virtue. So as with the illustration I've given, when a being dies and a non-virtuous karmic imprint propels the next rebirth, then they will necessarily be born in the lower realms, say as an animal or as a preter. So that is definite. From a non-virtuous karmic imprint that propels a rebirth, it is definite one will be born in the lower realms. But the completing karma that ripens can be either virtuous or non-virtuous. And so if it were virtuous, in the case of the dog, that would have a comfortable home, plenty to eat, and so forth. So the virtuous karmic imprints, the completing karma that ripens in a lifetime can be either virtuous or non-virtuous. And so too with pretas, in that some of them have better conditions than others.
그래서 당연히 남기 이다세디 지게 조도안에 그디나 즉 되게 강하게 되는 순고로 와도 이다세디 이나다디 될 이달에 변조 풍선 소바 열에서 즉 순고와.
Generally, we know with pretas or hungry ghosts that they have tremendous difficulty gaining food or drink, or if they gain it, they cannot consume it, and so forth. But here, it's given, hungry ghosts or pretas are given as a rebirth where it's possible to have prosperity.
Korong le pe yu penjo pe rimbochi mangbo wada da korong ge wonggo korong re de wa ine korong le bi ji da korong le sa ne zhuo duo ya gang se de se tu go ma le.
What this means is a hungry ghost being born as a preta is necessarily propels there. The propelling karmic imprint is non-virtuous, but should there be virtuous completing karma ripening, what it will not ripen as is them being able to have sufficient to eat and drink. But how it would ripen is that their material conditions would be sufficient, would be relative to other pretas, would be excellent. But they would still be struggling to be able to eat and drink. So that does not change for the preta if their virtuous karma ripening, but their material conditions, their resources, other than food and drink, could well be abundant.
밀리네 되는 연구로와 미변조 주부제 소소 사야동하다 요 사되제 변조 전부여번에 소소선 요 사되지 사되는 아니 제마 아니 소소 변조의 현다히루로와 지난 디나시 디 대소에 디로하다 소소게 변조 사야기 선음 사바레데 롱죄기 선음 사요 말와 지난 디나시다디 이다디게 코노솔 변조 푼소보 요르세 푼소보 코로 여기 야선음 사요 조직이 사요래 이내 롱주에기야 그런 게 롱주에기 선음이 사마두자 디다 고노지야라고 말어.
So for the preta, if they have virtuous completing karma, they will live relative to other pretas in comfortable circumstances, but they will still struggle to eat and drink. So sometimes, even in our world, the world of humans, this can be seen that someone relative to those in their community has really comfortable conditions, but they still struggle with food and drink.
Can I just ask, with these four possibilities, what are the two things being compared? Is it good conditions and bad conditions? Or
So again, we'll come to that now, the final sentence there, where the four possibilities are discussed, and we'll see if it's clear then.
나 대단나 서 데네 자다 편지랑 조직이래 데네 히나 대단나 데네 히나 편지 기회 방라 조직장 기회 방바 아니 미다 조직 방바 지요래제 근데 편지 기회 방라 조직 미기회 방바다 이용을 이제 니문이제 데네야 편지 미기회 방라 조직 미기회 조바자 직접 숨 that 편지 미기위 팬라 조직 기회 줘봐 니 다시 무시요래 제대 개발마선의 시요래 제대.
The text then continues. Thus there are four possibilities. So first of the four, the first, that which is propelled by virtuous propelling action and completed by virtuous action. So that's number one. Number two, reading from the beginning, that which is propelled by virtuous propelling action and a non-virtuous completing action. So that's the second. So the propelling karma is virtuous, and the completing karma is either virtuous or non-virtuous. So that's the first two. Then the third, and that which is propelled by a non-virtuous propelling action and completed by a non-virtuous completing karma. That's the third. And again, a non-virtuous propelling karma, but is completed by a virtuous completing karma. So that's the fourth. So here we have the two propelling karmas, which are definite, of either virtuous or non-virtuous, and each can be subdivided into a virtuous propelling karma with a virtuous or non-virtuous completing karma, making two, and a non-virtuous propelling karma can be completed by either virtuous or non-virtuous completing karma, making another two.
당한저당보다 조시 기회 방바 조시 기회 소바세디 당한저게 개왕 아마 따수름 소위게 레게 디기 편제레 기회 당한저 밀이야게 밀하다 밀이 개와디다 네 편제 기회 방바저와 편제 기회 방바 담이 디 덴텔이야 소수게다 근데 튕기에로다 디네가 강아가에 맞게 야고 주여베나 중보에다 빈 조시 기회레 조제 기획이 기획이 레디기다 방 편반做吧 效果 做야 돼. 그런 이 되는 시내 맛이 봐도 소소히 튕겨나 관계 강화 강하면 두스는 야보 존재 맛이 원다 조제 기획 做吧 效果래. 진짜 편지야 기획 편발에 조제양 기획 做吧 해서.
Let's give illustrations then. So, to take a virtuous propelling karmic imprint, accompanied by virtuous completing karma. So, being the virtuous karmic imprint, if that is a virtuous karmic imprint propels a rebirth, it will necessarily be in the higher realm, so let's say as a human. And then if this is accompanied by virtuous completing karma, then the person, the human, will have possibly excellent physical as well as material conditions. So this is a good outcome where virtue was created in a past life, and that's ripened both as the propelling karma as well as virtuous karma as ripened as completing karma. Then one is born in the higher realms as a human, for example, with excellent physical and material conditions.
조제 기회 판에 그래서 편제 기회 판에 조제 미기회 줘봐셔야 돼. 당연히 편제 기회 사지 기회를 미리 깨봐 이내야. 되는 체대려야 즉 튕경 공부 강한 슈 체제 되는 쇼바나 되는게 체네 안지마 시송바나데 조제 기회 미기회 줘봐. 가서 튕경 공부 차대 미기회 레기 가서 레기 제고 차대로 되는 자리 다 조제의 편이 조제 기회를 미리 깨봐래 기회 편발에 돼 이는 된del이야 강아 되는게 튕겨서 강하시고 전에 도전 제 미지 개와 중원자 조제의 기회 미기회 줘봐래서 비니버 제고래.
That was the first. Let's look at the second. Still staying with the virtuous propelling karmic imprint, so reborn in the higher realms, but accompanied by non-virtuous completing karma. So let's say one's born as a human. This would have been propelled by a virtuous propelling karmic imprint. Born as a human, but the completing karma is non-virtuous. Then this person is going to struggle. They may have physical impediments. They may have material impediments. So their life will have problems coming from non-virtuous, the ripening of non-virtuous completing karma. But the propelling karmic imprint was virtuous because they are born as a human.
난 조제 미기의 방법이다. 다 조제 미기의 방법 안에 가서 편제 미기의 레기 방지 조제의 미기의 조바디 배순바디다. 당연히 미기의 레니마 수준마송하제 되내기 전에 소주발로 소베지비와 디비옹 레기 미기의 레기 왕의 개와디 둔돌을 바뀌어와래. 대시 아주 베네키로 둔돌을 개와래. 난 둔돌을 개와래 편지게다 미기의 방법에 다 조제에 대한 니마 다 되내기 진바당 되내기 매와자 세대리야 호랑라 사야도야 강아슈 체제 되내기 언제치 마시바도 내 강아 체선배나 제자디 조제에 미기위 조바리다 편에디야 미기위리 강송을 깨바래 강송 된데라야 호랑리야 배사야도야 되내기 톤에 강아슈 체바로 지나다 편제야 미기위 편 조제에 대한 미기위리 조바리에서 비르디.
So let's look at the second group of two. So this then relates to a non-virtuous propelling karmic imprint ripening at the time of death. So if it's non-virtuous, one will necessarily be born in the lower realms. So let's say it's a non-virtuous karmic imprint of weak strength, then one is born as an animal, let's say a dog. But if that rebirth as an animal is accompanied by non-virtuous completing karma, then this dog will struggle to find food to eat, maybe in a difficult environment and so forth. So when both a non-virtuous propelling karmic imprint as well as non-virtuous completing karma come together, then that being has abundant problems and difficulties. They're born in the lower realms and their conditions are particularly difficult, perhaps physical, otherwise material. And so therefore will have, for example, this dog struggling to eat and so forth.
조제 미기위의 편라 안에 가서 편제 미기위 리기 편제 조제 기위 줘봐서 되듯이 주반에 이제 다제고 미기위 리기 왕이 개와도 둔돌 개와래 벤 둔돌 개와래 말에데 이나다 둔돌 땡빈 기로 디틴델이야 안 코로리아 직사야 동야다 튕게다 저다도 지금 약고 쉬어버나 고마시바도 되네 약고 주중바나 제자다 고 개와 폐일이 미기일이 눈을 편발에 대해 조직일이 개일이냐마 그런 게 진비기 답이 개일이 제부 민지 호랄이야 세델이야 근데 강아 제사야 동야다 대유도 강아 맞춰봐지 곧 좋아인자 제자다 편지 미규의 편지 조직 개일 조과 개일이 조과세 무시바도 차고래.
And the final permutation in the four, again, non-virtuous propelling karmic imprint ripens at death. And let's say it's a weak non-virtuous karmic imprint, so one's born as in the animal realm. Again, let's say as a dog. But now this rebirth is accompanied by virtuous completing karma. And so therefore, this dog perhaps will have plenty to eat, maybe be adopted by a loving family, and really have good conditions around it. So this is... whilst it is suffering due to a non-virtuous karmic imprint propelling rebirth in the lower realms, it's attaining or encountering a lot of benefit from virtuous completing karma ripening.
that be cheated. 당한저 편지의 기회리기 편세대 다 편지의 기회리기 아주 미르게 와이면나 다 미기에 차네 마시바도 유아태야 가요 말 미 편지 밀레바 예사로 미기에 마시바도 가브릴레 둔돌 차야다 가브릴레야 미샤라 차야 되네 규어줘야 가요 말로 편지의 기회리기 편바들 편지의 기회리기 편야디 미기에 소바나고 기네 마시바도 그런 게다 미라진 되고로와 유아 가야 줘요 말에.
Further point to make here is that the propelling karmic imprint that ripens at death and propels rebirth, when one takes rebirth, one does not, that propelling karma doesn't change or get altered during that lifetime. So let's say it's a virtuous karmic imprint that propels rebirth as a human being. Then one is born as a human being, and throughout that entire lifespan that one has, one remains a human being. So the virtuous propelling karmic imprint, it doesn't change over the course of the propelled life.
다 조제 계획 얘기 조제기 제보다 조제 미기회 얘기 제보된 나 손민 봐용 거래. 변행아 좀 밀게 와시 밀게 봐나 네 로카싱을라야 그런 변조 빼 야구여 받은 등계 야구여 받이 조제 계획 얘기 되고 민디여 봐. 당 강섭질야 빼 교부차제 아니 변조의 냠차 침 교부차되네 강아사야 동야 되네 강아 제가 연구를 미치게 가서 세텔 맛이 빨아야 될래야 되네게 디다 대시 녀마디 조제 계획이 되고 민디어 다 디기 뉴버디 파조 차제 한지 다 콜이야 조제 미계획이 되고 민디거래 제가 민거래 제가 되네게 되네 연구를 봐 제가다 세들이야 배 변조야보다 튕겨야고 지구여 봐지 안젤이야 냠차진 배 교보 차로야다 야 가브릴이야 안지 세들이야 배 교보다 강아사야 되면 봐지도 디가서 조제 미기 얘기 되고 민디여 봐 다양 가슴질에 양 배지 유어신제 배 야고샤 튕겨야고 아니든 야고차 차지 차요로 봐 디차디 조제 기회 얘기 되고 민디고라 제가 딘델이야 배능아지 미 딘래야 조제 계획이 되고 직민산에 고마시 봐도 다라니 그 엄마 유아 용거래다. 가브리엘 조제 계획이 되고 조제 계획이 되고 미야다. 가브리엘 조제 미계획이 되고 미봐. 아데 만줄에 밀에 되는 용거를 눈돌에 되는 용거를 봐다.
In this section, we have the sentence that completing ones are undetermined. And what was mentioned, so that implies that the propelling ones are determined, or instead of determined, you can say definite. It's the same word. So the propelling karma is definite in the sense that virtuous karma, propelling karma leads to rebirth in the high realms, and it doesn't change over the lifetime. So when one is born in the higher realms, or a particular realm, one stays in that realm. So these are two meanings to being definite. For completing karma, they are undetermined or not definite, indefinite. And there, the meaning is twofold. In that what has already been covered is that should one be born in either the higher or lower realms, one can be accompanied by completing karma that is either virtuous or non-virtuous. So that point's already been covered. But then the additional point is, one can encounter a variety of virtuous or non-virtuous, completing karma in a lifetime. So let's say someone attains rebirth as a human being. So what's clear is a virtuous karmic imprint propelled rebirth as a human being. So this is definite, and throughout this lifespan, this being will remain human. That's definite too. The completing karma that they were born with, let's say, was non-virtuous in terms of wealth, and they are impoverished. They're born into an impoverished family. So this is the ripening of non-virtuous completing karma. When that non-virtuous completing karma ends, and it may be exhausted, and it may well, that non-virtuous completing karma may well be exhausted long before the virtuous propelling karma is exhausted. And in that case, when the non-virtuous completing karma that has led to impoverishment is exhausted, a virtuous completing karma may well ripen. And then this will be observed as this person, their fortunes are turned around from living thus far a life of poverty. Now they have lifted themselves up and they are in a better circumstance, or maybe a remarkable circumstance. But what's clear is there's change. And this change has come about, just to repeat, from the non-virtuous completing karma being exhausted. So its energy, its strength being exhausted. And now another completing karma can ripen. And if it is a virtuous one, their circumstance will change. And so this, of course, can happen in the opposite direction. First, a virtuous completing karma, and when it's exhausted, non-virtuous completing karma can ripen.
Dene geda zoji gile gi tebodila gewile da migivile dusine kora capture that dus yungurwa and dela that bene zoji gile gewile da migivile niga nyamdo yongba yungurwa da zoji gile pe mangure da le da naga mangurwa 지나다 조지ले gewile da migivile gi zoji nyamdo minba yungurwa ben sugu jige yahu da ongwa chasan changje yahu shobene 그 조직이 대부 양 디안 조직이 대부 차거로와 왕보 창화라 소바다 차산데 지 에너지 보이 되네게 차산 되네 예배나 아직 튕긴 예강아 제베든 내 조직 미기빌레 직직대 진짜 조직 기빌레다 미기빌레 나가 먹고서 되네 가브릴라 조직 기빌레다 미기빌레 니가 가사 지리야 냠도 민바 용거다 근데 조직 기빌레 조직이 레델이야 윤링도 망부용 거래도 거로 뉴베체 쇼미 왕게 가브리엘이야 되게 제부 로직스 용거야 다오치 용거야 니미치스 용거야 까미치스 용거야 되네 나소 용서이로 하다 조직 계획이 되보다 미계획이 되보다 되네게 나소 용거 다디 조직 계획 조직이 레 빼만 남랑 망부 빼시 호실이 망부여야 돼.
So this word undetermined or indefinite, it's really carries quite a lot. So in terms of the propelling karma, this is definite, there's not so much to say, and it's definite in these two ways. Virtue leads to rebirth in the high realms, and the second way is that one doesn't change realm as long as that imprint still maintains its energy or its force. So for propelling karma, the discussion about being definite, there's not so much to say. But in terms of completing ones which are undetermined or not definite, there's so much to say. So what is, in addition to what is already mentioned, is that completing karma does not necessarily ripen one after the other. They can and they do ripen one after the other, but several can also ripen together. So for example, when death comes, a single propelling karmic, not necessarily a single, so a karmic imprint will propel one into a new rebirth. This can be accompanied by several completing karmic imprints, some of which could be virtuous, some non-virtuous. So for example, virtuous karmic imprint propels rebirth as a human. A virtuous completing karmic imprint ripens and one's body is healthy and fine. One's sight and hearing and limbs, everything is fine. So this comes from virtuous, completing karma. But one is born into impoverishment. That comes from non-virtuous, completing karma. So in this way, one sees how at the time of birth, or at the time of being propelled into a new birth, one can be accompanied by a ripening of virtuous and non-virtuous, completing karma. So this is a further understanding of it being indefinite. Moreover, the duration of these karmic imprints, of the completing karmic imprints, are indefinite. Whereas for the propelling karmic imprints, they are definite. They are the lifespan, whatever that may be. But for the completing karmic imprints, they may pass very quickly, few moments, few hours, few days, and then be replaced by others. Or they may last decades, maybe even a whole lifetime. So the completing karmic imprints, in terms of their duration, there's also a lot of variety.
Andine ya le delia kariyorosne nyoa ngibe le da nyoa mangibe le seadi yaji legi da nemini da denigi jebu le de nyoa le da nyoa mangibe le seadi ondusine ya yewa niche jungole.
In this presentation, if we look just further up on page 137, other categories of action. So we've looked at the first. This is 2 points. The difference between propelling and completing karma. And now we come to the second. The difference between that which will be definitely experienced and that which will not necessarily be experienced. So reading from the text, the difference between what will definitely be experienced and what will not necessarily be experienced. That which will definitely be experienced is what has been done intentionally and has been accumulated. That which will not necessarily be experienced is what has been done intentionally but has not been accumulated.
She samba joa to chasan sang de le sagro de sa de bele business.
Looking at the first sentence, that which will definitely be experienced is that which has been done intentionally and has been accumulated. What that means is the 4 branches of the karmic action are complete. All 4 of them have been completely present. And those 4 we looked at a while ago: basis, attitude, which includes the motivation, performance, and completion. So when those 4 components are complete, then it is karma that will definitely be experienced. Now read the sentence again. That which will definitely be experienced is what has been done intentionally and been accumulated. So when virtuous karma is accumulated completely, so those four components are there. So one has a fully formed karmic imprint, or a karmic imprint with its full potential. Should that ripen, this virtuous karmic imprint with its full intention, it has the capacity to ripen as a propelling karmic imprint, and where it will send one is propel one's rebirth is in the higher realms. So such a karmic imprint, it will definitely ripen. So such a karmic imprint, because the four components are there, it will definitely ripen. And should it ripen as a propelling karmic imprint, it will also ripen as or propel a rebirth in the higher realms.
다 뇨 망에 발라네 뇨 망에 바니 삼신도 제바당 뇨 망에 바니 삼신도 제라 마사바오스로다 뇨 망에 바니 삼신도 제라 마사바오스리다 그냥 저기 삼신도 제바 심제로 소주기 안에 시다 삼바 조와 차상제 나 삼신도 조와 차상제 제지단에 되는 아직 근데 semjeroda jowa kunoro sie sumje sowa sembegi edilwa samshindu jela masabo sedi jesan denige samshindu sochugui jawara chelu ande pani so ma paralia jowa kiesona les chasan sayo mara samshindu le sochubi jawa jiguro ine le sayo mara masawanza denige leda mange bare seji 시 찬데 다 다른 줍사로와 마시 공로와 마시 걸ben 가브리엘 소주게 자와지는 마시 곧 디르게 자와라다 조와 타도 망고 중는 망고와 데니게 다 간질레 조와 파서 마소바다 마시 바라 차상데 다 지금 교바게 데니 제바이나 아니 디 개와디 예사교 말와 마사반자데 아니 가소레 가소리 디기 망해 바레스 개와치 망가선 기에게 기도 말해지래 탈도 주요 말하지나 차상마상으로 와지 레사요 말다.
The second sentence, that which will not necessarily be experienced is what has been done intentionally but not been accumulated.
So 약속 디용서 일람나래야 니람나야 심지어 소주비게 예 자와치 소주비 심지어 소주 지고로 받아 니람래야 다 딜레 자와 차상 지고로 받아 그 군로 심지어 소주디 군로 요래 군로 심 소주비 자와 지고로 봐 이내다 가르친 거마데 시다 타도 주야 가면와 인자다 삼신도 제 소주비 자와 제발에 이나 타도 마주베자 레사요 말레스 제나디 디니기 레마사와 데소 망해 바래 사실.
So that which will not necessarily be experienced is where these four components, the basis, the attitude, performance, and completion, are incomplete. So there may be only one or three present, but not all four. And so there are many illustrations such as this. Perhaps one is killing. One has a motivation. One is killing something. One's engaging in performance, but it doesn't come to an end. Why? Because you think, actually, this is really not good to kill. So regret comes for what you're doing. You see this is wrong, so you stop, and the being doesn't die. One hasn't engaged in the complete action. Another illustration, which is also very clear, is if one is dreaming about killing. So in the dream, one has the wish to kill, and one goes through the whole performance, the performance of killing. And in one's dream, maybe one's successful and you kill whatever. But this is not karma that will, is not completely accumulated. So it will not necessarily be experienced. Why? In that dream, one had the motivation to kill and one engaged in some dreamlike activity, but you're not killing anything. There is no basis. In your dream, you may have thought of something, but that is not a sentient being. The basis is a sentient being. And because there's no basis, there's no completion. So therefore, this karmic action is not complete because the four components are not there. Therefore, it is karma that will not necessarily be experienced.
다 용어 녀바 세델야 다지서 야와 디나데 송용마데 다 세델 용어 리테보데 세델 민바 냐 용어 녀바 아니 개와 치마래 아니 개와 다지시네 개와 치마 다가라 나 용어 녀바 아니 아직 개와 치마 만용와제 양 개와 치마 치메 로 개와 가시기 제일이야 아니 용어 데디 데네 용어를 제사데 기네 용규로 야야 아니 가서 체대라 용교 기네 용교 렌자 현란 용교 세대 되게 나서 다 용용하게 레들라 되게 나서 용거래 제사 디나네 미도 디나데 요 말해 그래
그래서 소에 쇼간 셔가 이게니 용어도 이세니 발라제고 용어
거도 디나도에 알레 어디 연유래셔데 땡이 민누레스 되네 어레다디 디제 다제 레제바당 사바세디 다양 레제바다 사바 제사기 캬바라 카요레세디 디제샤다 제바당 사바세디라 제바니 사바함 삼밤 삼내장 륜하기 군에 나오세 제바듯이 되네 사바니 이 밀람도 제바소 주보 마도벨레소스 되네 마사바니 밀람도 제바소 넘버 주오사
Reading from the text, the difference between what has been done and what has been accumulated is as follows. What has been done is an intention or is a performance with body or speech following an intention. What has been accumulated are any actions apart from the 10, those done in a dream and so forth. Conversely, what has not been accumulated are the 10 types such as those done in a dream. And these 10 are mentioned in the index is number 0.70.
le cheba da sapa that le cheba da sapa le cheba da le chela masapa le majela and sapa said in the sungure that don't have sungura in ma le cheba da sapa said le cheba said lungaki sudi in the simchen soju masono soju gunya laje and lungaki jawachi le jigores or le jigores le cheba said this word that they samasa kishon le cheba that 제사단 안주게 레체라 마사바디 레체바세 된실라기 에세 중도하데 그래서 제바니 사바 삼밤 삼네게 룽어 꾸니 롱오스 꾸니 랑제 안스 데네서 심제 소주 제고 심비 꾸니 랑 데네 소주 제게 된달라 룽어게 자와 제바들다 레체바세 에세
So now we're looking at just reading from the text, the same part. The difference between what has been done and what has been accumulated is as follows. So looking at the difference between these two. What has been done is an intention or is a performance with body or speech following an intention. So it can be just the intention, for example, to kill. Or, so the intention or the motivation to kill can be just that, or following the intention to kill, one actually does something. So there is some form of performance. In this case, it would be physical rather than speech.
Milam Matobala, Milam Maimba, Nanzuke, Lungagi, Sedu, Kunia Lang, and the Kunwa Samba, Tiketine, Lungagi, Jawa Cheche, Tartu Trusona, the less agrees.
So explaining then the term what is done, as it says, there's an intention, then there's something that is done, but not necessarily accumulated. Or done can also be intention as well as performance, but not necessarily accumulated. So for it to be accumulated, now we go into the third sentence, for it to be accumulated means that you have done so, there was the motivation, you've done so in relation to the performance, in relation to something, and it's being completed. But it's not referring to things, if it was something done in a dream, then it would not be accumulated. What has been, so now reading from the text, what has been accumulated are any actions apart from the 10. So in other words, an action that is not, for example, a dream or any of the other 9.
다 류가 산비가 군에 쇠디요 산비가 군에라 류가게 자와 제바 있나 레사비 캬와요 말에서 디가르스네 밀람도스 마사바네 밀람도 제바소 넘버 주어스 밀람이 내가소다 제대로 군로에 바지 류가게 자와 지고래 이나다 탈도 주부매면서 아니 제 아니가서 레사비요 말이지 제자다 류가게 산비가 군에라 류가게 자와 제바나 레사바요래 마사바요레스 레사바데 가르스네 밀람 이내가 많이 비게 될 타도 죽선에 레사고래세 다 밀람 이내가서 되니기 제바네 류가게 산비군이 류가게 자와 제바래 돼 이나 레사고 말해서 나디 숨바 레기 사마사기마다 가사디게 레사마사기시로 와지다 밀람기 가사디게 나저 밀람에 가는쪽에다 밀람 많이 배갑라 쇠디군에라 조와체 때 타도 주스는 가는쪽 레사고 레저와 때 밀람기 가사디기 아니 거 쇠디게 군로 여러 그런 군로 여러 조와지고래 이나다 제베네 콜 레사고 말가서 콜 타도 주고 말해서 때 레사마사데 때 가사디 기시로 와다.
So just to make sure it's clear, because perhaps the text isn't so. So what has been done? So done, there's some activity. So that activity could just be mental. So there's a motivation to do something, and it may be followed by some action, so the performance. But has it been accumulated? And this accumulated means, has the karma been accumulated? So you have the wish to do something in relation to a basis, and you have engaged in performance. But have you accumulated the karma or not? So this depends if the action has been completed or not. And if we're talking about a dream, which is the one illustration of the 10 the text gives, then it has not been accumulated because there is nothing, the karma done in a dream is not complete. So here, just we see this word accumulated, what it means is, has the karma been accumulated or not? You may have done something, but has the karma been accumulated or not? So invariably it will be yes, because the action's been brought to completion. But if it's done in a dream, completed in a dream, that is not a complete karmic action, and therefore the karma has not been accumulated.
나디 이제 난 용어기 레셔야 되리스도 용어라 제보 녀위 뒤유권에 숨어서다 용어기 레셔야 되리야 아니 그 제보 녀위 뒤유권에 집에나다 여활마선 숨쳐야 레셔.
So now we're talking about when karmic imprints may ripen. So when karma is accumulated, when may it ripen? So we've now over the page, at the top of page 138.
안다 숨여래 숨내가래스네 통쇼라 뇨위기 레디 통쇼 버데 가살레다 통쇼라 뇨위 레세시고래 내 통쇼 뇨위 레디나 제부 이제 체델로 뇨고스 제사다 통学了你통学名下的통学点那个嘞电话那边嘞，但呢今年用有个嘞，那连着现在用的个嘞才送写过来。就啥到通学个嘞，现在看了我是呢，才大家人嘞啥呢？嘞个这部的才马西为才大家人了，这部的名个吧呢，点名的了，嘞的了，那通学个嘞来过来是嘞，通学用有个嘞，通学用有个嘞是过来。
Because what we are looking at is karma that is definite or not definite to be experienced. So now we come to the final part here of looking at karma that is definite to be experienced. To answer the question, so when will this karma that is definite to be experienced, when will it be experienced? And we see there are three. That which will definitely be experienced, a karma that will definitely be experienced, has three categories based on when the effect will be experienced. So of the three categories, the first, that which will be experienced as a visible phenomenon is an action whose effect will be experienced in this life. So in other words, something that is accumulated in this life and ripens in this life. That is the first possibility for karma that is definite to be experienced. Accumulated and ripens in the same life.
안에 기단 저기 기내 용주를 내려는 세대를 제부대 세대를 마음이 맞지 개와 치마들 인지미지 개위 치매된들라 제부대 용하게 내들라다 기내 용주를 기내서 개와 치마 양자지 개와 내지 개와 디텐라 제부대 민규가 봐서 딜레들이야 기내 용주를 내라 그래서.
So of the three categories, that was the first. Then the second, that which will be experienced after taking rebirth, it is an action whose effect will be experienced in the next life. So could really add here for clarity, experience in the very next life. So accumulated in the present life and will be experienced in the very next life.
디 레기 제보데 세델레 사바디 한 세델라 마민바 제보 세델라 민교마레 개와 치마레 민교마레 나 개와 치마네 한 숨바다 시방아바데 난 가브리엘야 개와 숨식이 첼레 제보 민바용고레 개와 자기 첼레 민바용고레 근데 온두시네 가실레 개와 치마다가라 마민바제 개와 양자지 개와 렌데 민바용고레 양지 개와 니숨네네 민바용고레 언제 제산 디니게 제보 뇨야게 제보 미야게 레데라 The
third possibility, the third category, that which will be experienced at another time is that which will be experienced in the life after that or beyond. So what this third category means is that karma accumulated in this life can be experienced in a life beyond the next. So we have these three possibilities or three categories. Karma accumulated in this life that may be experienced in this very life. The second, that's the first. The second will be karma accumulated in this life and experienced in the very next life. That's the second. And then the third, karma accumulated in this life and will be experienced in a life beyond the next. So it could be in 3 lifetimes. It could be in 4 lifetimes. It could be in 100 lifetimes. Go to any future points. So karma that is definite to be experienced can be experienced in this lifetime, the very next lifetime, or from 2 to more lifetimes. So anything beyond after the next lifetime.
그래서 아주 군로다 되게 삼로 숙체성의 돈에 니버체성의 돈에 주고래. 진짜 당아주 진배를 진바다위 선남을 사바이나 진짜다 소수의 군로배 즉 군로 잡고다 되게 배치 전부 되게 숙체배 돈에 아니 챤리아 진바다바이나 니기 진배 제보디다 제다라는 변조를 소소야 미야디 용도래. 진짜 되게 용거래. 아직 딜에 대수 충하지나 제다가라는 변비 진배되고 마음바지 개와 치마라래 개와 치마다가라래 진배되고 미바데 용거래. 근데 야된 딜에 대해서 아직 미바를 충하이네 되네 개와 가시기 제일이야 안 미바 용거래 제 제사다 도신의 숨도함.
What will differentiate between a karmic imprint accumulated in this life and ripening in this life, the very next life, or a life beyond the next life, comes down to factors such as the strength of the motivation. So let's take as an illustration the practice of generosity. So if it is done with a particularly powerful motivation, then one can experience the ripening effect of that karma in this very life. But if the motivation is not particularly strong, but still strong, one can experience it in the life after this, the ripening effects of that act of generosity. And if the motivation isn't particularly strong, then one can experience the ripening effects of that act of generosity in 2 or more lifetimes to come.
지바레 미기웰리기 대보야되는 지바차고 미기웰리 되니기 숙제중에 돈에 제다하라네 아니 미기 대보 미바용고래 아니 개와치마 미바용고래 아니 안개위 치마를 마미바지 개위 치마래 되네 미바용고로와.
And this is also the case with non-virtue. So with a powerful motivation, a particularly powerful motivation, the non-virtue performed in this life can be experienced in this life. But if the motivation is not particularly powerful, that non-virtue's karmic imprints may be experienced in our very next life. And if it is not that strong, the motivation, then it can be experienced in a life beyond the next life.
지마다 주님라 소바다 얘네기 람냠 곰네 제바나 곰베게 제보 텔레게 제 체텔라 람귤레 깨와 용구로와 체텔레 아직 야 파베고 바토바 용구로와 그래서 아니 통주 체텔라 제보지 체다가 민구로와 민바 차이고로와 아니 하데네게 곰제 체텔레야 람귤레 깨마tum나야 야 깨와 치메텔라 람귤레 깨와 용구로와 그래서 끼네 용구로 차이고로와 아직 깨와 치마 마드네 무티지 냠네제데 치메 땡데와 아직 람귤레 끼도와 용구로와 아주 람슈치 뭐 공부이네다 만내가 람마두바세 제자당 아주 그 장슈심 계에게 냠는 전에 야고시 두 번에 체대라야 장슈심 계시기로와 이 잠니주 공부 제보디 깨네 용요 체디 제보를 민거로와 다 체대라 장슈심 계마도 계와 치메텔라 장슈심 계와 용구로와 안 되네 매바지 안 계와 치메 계와 니숨이 제데 야 계와 용구로와 대수 제자다 잠니주 공부기 다 제보텔라야 깨네 용요르게 제보 계 용다 깨네 가서 통신 용요야 깨네 용요야 렌다션로 용하세 용으로
So let's take as an illustration someone who has the aspiration to be a bodhisattva. So to become a bodhisattva, they know they have to accumulate a lot of virtue. So they practice ethical restraint, generosity, and so forth. And they do so. So they're practicing these virtuous acts or deeds. They're cultivating the mind of ethical restraint, the mind of generosity, with the motivation to become a bodhisattva, so as to lead all beings to Buddhahood. But they are not yet a bodhisattva. So if they're accumulating these virtuous minds with a really powerful motivation, it is possible in this life they will achieve the result of that virtue and become a bodhisattva. If the motivation is not particularly intense, then in their very next life, they may well become a bodhisattva. And if the motivation is more or lesser so, then it will be in a life after that. So 2 or more lifetimes, that result of these virtuous acts will be experienced.
유단 기인 시고로 유단 기인 기고 시고로 당서 유된의 shabu 주바이나 아니 제보된의 야고 슝그레 유된의 남바 주바이나 제보된의 슝그레 에세데 유단 제비고 시고로와 세상 유된의 그 숙천모 야고는 세다 제보다가라야 세딜레 제보 민투그레 유된의 그 숙천모라지메나 제마데 용그레 안디메나 야 제마데 용시게 되세데 가든 유단 제비 시고래 다지상 레 라면도 지단 유단 제보랍도 양한 저기 치료기 오비 유단 제보세야지 요로와 지 사번 딱 주제에 대한 윤리기 기시로와 당아서 레 기시연도 가르쳐 오는 삼로드나 군론 삼비기 군이 랑제 삼바단 제외 토네 다 디기주에게 규시 사야시로와다 그래서 레시로와 고고로와다 레 셈주 셈바데니기 셈주 셈바데라 레야지 데지다다 인육 규다레데 이나다 규디 디기주에게 유 삼르되는 유에게 셈주 셈바데라다 민레레 세다고 인유던다라 삼르문의 유에게 이제 디기주에게 유디샤고래
We've been covering the presentation of karma for a while, and a lot has been said. We've covered a number of pages. When we talk about karma, it really comes down to cause and effect, This is the way to look at karma, through the understanding of cause and effect. In particular, this is clear in this presentation here, that the strength of the cause not only leads to the strength of the result, but also when that result will be experienced. So a particularly strong cause will lead to a strong result, and that result may well be experienced in this life. Or if the cause is not quite so strong, it can be experienced in the life straight after this. Or if the cause is not that strong, a life beyond that. So when we talk about karma, what you must be, the term cause and effect and karma can be used interchangeably, like I just have, but they can also have a different meaning. So for example, in our material world, we can talk about cause and effect, and illustrations where we wouldn't necessarily be talking about karma. In that, you want to gain some flowers, you know what seeds to plant and what conditions are required. So there, that's cause and effect. But when we're talking about karma, we're not talking about the material world at all. We're really talking about the inner world, the mental world. In that, when we accruing karmic seeds, these we accrue through the mental factor of intention. And if it's a virtuous intention, we are accumulating the karma for happiness or desired results. And if we are accruing, if we have a non-virtuous intention, we are then accruing karmic seeds that will lead to suffering or undesired results.
내면이 교세하다 된지게 편지게 레사 조세게 레사다 두시네 주디 당한적 가르들에 남나 당한적 삼류 때에 개와 치마다 내 디기 주에게 교 개와 치마 문디오 고방 계획이 규되라 다 만주게 편지게 레사 편지게 레사 시고로와 제사다 개와 치마 안송을 개와 레 규되라 편지 미개벨에 시고로와 다 된다라 다 돈다 디스모다 제사당 좀 안송을게 당 된줄게 니디 규리 가래라 나네 편지 개벨에 되게 된줄게 고레스 다 편지 미개벨에 되게 된줄게 고레세 다 디시고로와 나 제사다 나 하나줄 담가 가려서네 제사 결혼하기와 치마 된줄게 오데 안줄 된줄게 오도 딩이 담보고레스 제사 결혼 된줄게 와서 봐나 편지 기회를 주고 그래서 다 편지 기회를 마도 편지 미개를 주면은 결혼 안 손을 끼고 그래서 돈달라 등까지 아주 동안에 안줄에 타고 와 인자 안줄에 타발라 아니 타야기 유디 마가 그래서 유디 가야 돼 가르가 그래서 안줄게 유 독초디 아니 폐 기회를 쌓아야 돼서 기회 편지 기회를 쌓아 편지 기회를 삼나 된돌이 펑그래 제자들 레 방그레스 제자디네자 편지 계획을 쌓고 그래서 내가 둘다 돈달라 라트 디치고 그러다.
This morning we completed looking at virtuous karma and its effects, and then we came to look at propelling and completing karma, and now karma that is definite or not definite to ripen. So the purpose of what we are looking at here is to add knowledge, to add depth to what one hears in one's general teachings, so as to apply one's mind ever more so to the quality of motivation to both cultivate and to have as one's guiding motivation throughout our day, throughout all our activities. Because it's quite clear, everyone will prefer a rebirth in the higher realms in their next life. But that mere acceptance is insufficient to lead to the attainment of that result. One has to develop the required causes. So from what we've looked at today, it should be clear there's a propelling karmic imprint that propels our rebirth in either the higher or lower realms. And whether the rebirth is in the higher or lower realms is dependent on whether it's a virtuous or non-virtuous karmic imprint that ripens, which means, with that recognition, that our rebirth does not come about in dependence on our desires or our wants. It comes about in dependence on the causes that we create. Hearing the presentation then, taking it to heart, will aid our focus in striving to accumulate the causes required to achieve the result that we want. To not just hope for the best, but to create the causes that will lead to that best outcome, that outcome we desire. And understanding also then how one accumulates virtuous causes. Understanding also, or joining that with the understanding that one has to accumulate virtuous causes to attain desired results. This is what one will do. In particular, to gain the virtuous karmic imprints that will lead to a propelling karmic imprint leading to rebirth in the higher realms.
나는 딘드르게 게레데 아니 가나사오 기위레세 편제 기위레 사나 가나사오레라다 나델이야 디숭도하다 지산 사하디 지사빈행도 소주바로 시면나 당보도 심진 소주제나 안디 야고요 말세네 라레 디퍼사그리스 아니 간돌리 게도고레 아니 심진 샤라 뉴고레세 비교 균다제 데니 균도 아다 심진 소주제 등이 방긴 심비 방고도 심비게 되바 다 디밤마반마다 탑미도 방고도 심비게 되바게지 방되게 삼마게 당보 균통 균다 데니 방되게 삼마게 데니게 삼마 방되 삼마게 데니 방되게 삼마게네 데니게 심진 소주사오기네 지금 매 삼비게 삼마 다두두신 당보디 조화 차용으로와 조화 된서 균지금야 심비게 심 타줘가지고 두신 삼다웨나 니다 심진 소주 방비게 게위레사고레디 디네 가소레 편지기레사지 조 사고로와 general 편지기레사 엔디나시다 소주바다 마진발레 두신 삼다웨나 디니기 사사다 편지기레사지 사고레사 사다로 디니레서 근데 소주바로 삼다웨나 소주베는 균여바다 디니기 통진의 소주 지금 소주의 방구도 셈비기 여바게 삼바디 내 소주 방구디 장이 내 소주 방기 셈비기 셈바도 진 삼다네 나 당에도 좋아 되네 저기네다 싸우기는 지금이야 셈베 셈 타줘요도 아니 도시는 타줘 공부이나 데 조직이 위리 사고래 그래서 편지기 위리 아니 페이지 사고래 해서 도시는 삼다에 지자다 도시는 삼다에게 삼다에도 이 삼로디기다 먼저 개와치만 온디에 고바기에 규디 두고를 지자다 개벨에 세디 디시고로 왔다디
The purpose of Dharma teachings is to convey information. The purpose of receiving Dharma teachings is then to take that information, investigate it, and integrate it. So let's give an illustration of how to utilize what you've heard thus far this weekend, and also draw in a little of what has been looked at in the previous weekend. So we spoke about how to accumulate virtuous karma. So let's take that and we've also spoken about, and many times, the need for virtuous karma. And we saw here in particular, in terms of propelling karma, that a virtuous karmic imprint is what propels rebirth in the higher realms. So therefore, one needs to accumulate virtuous karma. How to do so? So let's take a non-virtuous act of killing. Then, as we saw last night, you reflect on the faults of killing. And you do it through two components. The faults for myself, in other words, the suffering that will follow if I accrue this non-virtue. And leading to the wish, I do not want to suffer like that. And one then can, it's not necessary, but it's good to do, also reflect on the faults of killing in terms of others. So not just for self, but also others. It's not indispensable, but it's good to do. And reflect on the faults, of course, the being killed and their loved ones and so forth. So thereby, adding to this determined attitude, I will not kill. And this is, and even before this determined attitude, I will not kill, having reflected on the faults of killing, a virtuous mind comes that is seeing the faults of killing. Seeing the faults of killing is a virtuous mind, leading to the wish, I do not want to do this. That then gets developed into, I will not do this. And that then is the completion of this virtuous karmic imprint. So again, because this needs to be clear, one engages, so cultivating the intention not to kill requires reflecting on the faults of killing in relation to oneself and others, and leading to this virtuous mind of that killing is wrong, leading to the performance, I do not want to kill, leading to the completion, I will not kill. And in this way, because all four components are there, killing in relation to a being, so there's the basis, there's the attitude, there's the performance, and the completion. All four components are there. A complete karmic, a virtuous karmic imprint has been accrued. So, which would be called the virtuous karmic imprint of abandoning killing. So there's a virtuous karmic imprint of abandoning killing now on one's continuum. And it is a complete karmic imprint in that those four components of basis, attitude, performance, and completion are all there. Which means, being complete, it is definite to ripen. And being definite to ripen, it has the potential to ripen as a propelling karmic imprint. Should it ripen as a propelling karmic imprint, it is definite or determined that it will lead to rebirth in the higher realms. So this then is how to accrue a virtuous karmic imprint. By doing so again and again, now drawing in what we looked at last time in terms of the weight or the strength of karmic imprints. Doing the same meditation again and again strengthens your familiarity to it, which means you're gaining ever more karmic imprints. It's becoming ever more ingrained within you. And if you develop this wish not to kill, this determined attitude not to kill, so it's intense, then that karmic imprint is much more powerful. And this again is what we looked at last week. And if you do lengthy meditations, then the duration of the meditation, again, adds to the weight of that karmic imprint. So this is how to use this imparting of knowledge to develop the virtuous causes that are imperative for excellent rebirths.
다 돈다 닝보디 다 망보시에 남으시는 것도 되지 삼다 당한줄래 당한주기 라렌데디 디삼다들이 다 소주 발라서 위견다다 소주 방구도 선배 삼다데 되는 소주 자오기는 지메 선배 삼소야디 삼다디 가지고 소주 밥이 수름 소화래고로 수름래 디 개벨에 대전디 개업 치와 된류 편지기 내서 두신의 싸고 그래서 지난 뒤삼들이 하나양 땅으로 디나신다 준식이매 소주비매 마진발렘바지매 아니 준식이매 선배다 되게 삼는 두신 다디게 미유주 봉게래 개벨에 싸서 디디로다 돈아닝 보딩아서 디삼 땅고에 차고다.
So our responsibility is to engage in these meditations. So you've heard in our classes many times that the cause to be reborn in the high realms, say as a human, is ethical restraint. So this is now what we've looked at. We've looked at what is unethical behavior, the 10 non-virtues, and what is ethical behavior, the 10 virtues. So what does one meditate on? The 10 non-virtues, to see their faults, leading the faults in terms of the karmic impact on myself, as well as the harm brought to others, leading to the wish, leading to the virtuous mind that comes from seeing the faults of the 10 non-virtues, leading to the determination, I will not engage in them. So here I'm just saying 10 non-virtues, but one should do the meditation in relation to killing, in relation to stealing, in relation to sexual misconduct, and so forth, leading to these virtuous imprints of, I see the faults, I do not want to do this, I will not do this, and thereby creating these karmic imprints. Then thank you. We can conclude therefore. Jia. But I would take questions. Venerable Lobsang.
Killing might be in the book, and there might be a possibility of rejoicing in somebody killing over somebody else, or even reading the news sometimes. Would that be regarded as similar to a dream, like you're not accumulating, but you're planting some seed, but not accumulating?
So what when if one's either reading or a book or watching the news, and one sees killing, and one is glad that that person's died, there's some acceptance and positive acceptance of this killing act. Is that then more likened to a dream where the karmic imprint is incomplete, or would it be a complete action? How would it be?
Yeah, I suppose there's no accumulation,
Yes.
but there's
So it's a done but not accumulated. Yeah.
simji jawo di seba da din tona ya hu chung so se be samlo chen ne jesu shen jesu mi ge che ba le jesu yiran che ba di ko sai go re ine nyawa je phenji le se de sa go ma re ka son kun lo yo ma so so le kun lo sue kun lo yo ma ro so su ge shan le su ro je nga yo ma ro je dan jo wa dang so su ge ga ya chang yo ma je dan de jesu yiran je be ki wa di ba zam sa go re.
So, in brief, yes, it would be similar to that, because what it comes down to is the four components are not complete. And you would have been pleased in this person's death, maybe thinking things will now be better, but so there is a basis, because it's about someone, but you had no motivation to kill, and you instructed no one to kill, so you did no performance directly or indirectly. And whilst you may have been pleased in the act being completed, for you, there really was no full karmic, the karma was not accumulated because all four components, in particular, the motivation for that killing to happen and the performance are completely absent. So, yeah, similar to a dream in that way, in that the four are not complete. Okay. Priya Shempa? Steve?
So, two-part question. The first part is, at the time of death, is it only one propelling karma that's the cause of the next rebirth?
Pembe lese.
A single karmic imprint.
So the second part is, with the whole collection of karmic imprints of being we have, like strong negative, strong positive, varying degrees, how is it determined which one is the cause of the propelling karma?
Di korongi da jusavi kala Gabriel jusaye ngachi khaba yungura jignye sa jikje sa de nege khaba yungure na Gabriel ya sadu kablo kunno shuk chechung thone khaba yo de shuk cheche de shuk che ni le mingore shuk chwa de jel mingoro de ne chwa de jeza de nege thone yu yure de na so yure de gen na so yure de ngachi yo gen da mara yungu yure 당은 주게다 디다디레서 시야에 갈래 하고로와.
What cannot be done is for one to determine what will that imprint be that ripens at the time of death, because there are many factors involved. Primarily comes down to what is the predominant or the most powerful imprint on one's continuum. So to know what that is a bit beyond us. When it was accumulated, etc., is unknown. So it's most likely to be what is most powerful, but there are also ripening factors, conditions that also can influence what it is that ripens at the time of death.
뇽바로치 데네기진다 야 검시 가래 소스라나 넘긴데 검시 숙체중 돈에 안데 녀름이 뭐 검시 숙체에 녀름이 받아 숙충하니 제름이 받이는 용거리에서 안데 네게 내가 견섬들의 긴 가래 체교면은 긴 로지 최당의 돈에 야지 녀름이 받아 데네지 용거리에서 송도와 나는 데다 가지다 게임 망불리그로 베네 시로체되다 데니게 게임 다마를 니기로 받아 베네 소소게 짜짜라야 차야게 시우지 자치모를 닐 통선 디전선에 이게를 미야냐 여러분 야 소소게 라마로 다 데니게 대바 전선에 야 게빌리 미야게냐 닐미야 고비 여러분 디나 소용 거 끼니 dob니 용식이스도
So as you rightly pointed out, on our continuum are a large number of imprints, virtuous and non-virtuous, and probably a large number which are powerful as well. So what is most likely to happen at the time of death is the most powerful imprint on one's continuum, because of its strength, will propel one's rebirth. That will be the propelling karmic imprint, whether it's virtuous or non-virtuous. If there's a powerful, particularly powerful virtuous and a particularly powerful non-virtuous imprint, so you'd say of similar strength, then how do you determine which, probably neither would be able to dominate. But what would happen then is what one is most habituated to. That is likely to ripen at the time of death. So what one is most habituated to. That being said, it's still not definite or precise. This yes, that no. In that, there are other factors or conditions that will impact whatever that imprint is that propels. For example, if one is once with one's spiritual teacher or thinking of one's spiritual teacher, that will have a positive impact on the karmic imprint that ripens. On the other hand, if one has a strong attachment for one's possessions or for one's possessions or people, that too will have an impact. So it's not, in terms of what that karmic imprint is, it's not so clear-cut, it's this and not that, because there are a number of factors involved. Maybe this afternoon? Okay. Thanks, Cameron.